Hello, and welcome to another FHIR for Developers tutorial video. My name is Gino Canessa. Today we're continuing on the C#.NET Core accessing a smart FHIR server. And today we're going to get into setting up the local web server so that we can redirect. As usual, there's a lot of content, so let's jump right in. First, just for place setting, in case we're picking up here, we're in the middle of this project and we are trying to go through this authorization sequence. So in the last video, at the end of part 2, we managed to get all of the from the FHIR server, the authorization and token URLs that we need to talk to the auth server. So we need to do this redirect. But before we can redirect, we need to set up all these parameters. And one of them is their redirect back to us. So once the user has authenticated and said they approve, then it needs to come back to us. And that's going to be via an HTTP redirect right here with the access code we need. So we need somewhere to have this running. So let's go ahead and get that set up. So we're here in the same project we've been using. This is, I'm on main, but I do have branch minus VB. I have set up end of part 2, so right now that's where I am even with. So I'm just going to start up code, and we can get right to it. Opened up on the wrong monitor. There we go. So this is where we left the code off. And we can see we have our default FHIR server URL because we're using the Smart Health IT launcher. And we are able to get the authorize and token URLs. And so we can run this, and it should come back with our URLs here. Perfect. We have those two. So in the first segment, we added all of the packages we need, the NuGet packages. And though, again, those are links in the GitHub repo. So now we can go ahead and just start using them. The way to set up and initialize the web server and everything is a little bit tedious. So what I actually like to do is we're just going to drop out of this project for a second and make a temp directory. And if we remember when we were looking at .NET new list, so when we're listing all the templates we have available, there are a whole bunch of web-based web server templates. Now again, the reason we're not using them is because they have different restrictions because they're running typically in web contexts. So you can't have long-running threads and different things like that that interfere with it. So we'd rather keep the console, but now that we want to set one of these up, I'm just going to come over here and make a new web project. And I'm not interested in the name and directory structure and everything else because we're just going to borrow some code from here. So if we come and look at what it created, this is just the basic web template. And we can see there's a few things, and we can go ahead and add those. Our program has this create host builder. So it's doing a host builder, and then it's using this startup class. And then it's also pulling in some settings from a JSON file. And those are really the main things that we're interested in here. We did add the configuration extensions and everything else, so we can use this appsettings.json, and then we can add these other classes for what we need. So to start with, we're literally just going to copy this file and come across back here and paste it in. So we have the same app settings, and this you can see is just logging levels and things like this. So that's not all that interesting. And then we're going to come back here, grab startup, and we can copy that file too because we don't have a matching one here. We do have to change the namespace, and just for reference, we are using smart local as our namespace, so we'll put that in here. And we can leave everything as is for now. It's just a basic startup. You can see it's just going to, anything we get, it's going to just output hello world. So that'll work for getting us running at least. And then program we can't copy wholesale. We just need to copy this function, and we'll go ahead and put it in our program under our main for now. So we can see we can add this same project, and it's going to yell at us that we don't have all of our using statements, and that's fine. We can just add them, and I think there's one more here. Yes. Excuse me. So that takes care of that part, but we do need to actually call this function, which is this call here. Perfect. So we can close that one since we're done with it. And we'll say, let's do this after we've grabbed these things. Now, it was passing through the arguments, and this is because the host builder has some default arguments that you can pass through, so you don't have to implement them yourself as far as changing ports and different things like that. But we're not using any of those, and we don't really want to. So we're just going to get rid of them, and then we don't have to worry about passing anything through at this point. Perfect. So now, if we run this program, everything should still come through normally. And we can see that we have a web server running, and it just picked up all the defaults that it uses. So you can see it's got an HTTP server on port 5000, and then an HTTPS server running for port 5001. And if we launch these, you can see we get our hello world as expected. So that's not too painful, but there's a few things to notice. One is our program's still running, and we don't generally want that, because what's happening is this is a blocking call. So anything we try to put underneath this isn't going to happen. And again, if you're running a web server, that's fine, but we're just running this to pick up some things in the back. So the easiest thing to do here is actually change this. If we change this from run to start, then it's a non-blocking call. So this is just going to start it asynchronously. And so now it will start, but in our case, we have nothing happening underneath. So it's going to start the web server, and then it should immediately stop. That did not. Oh, there we go. Waiting for everything to be exposed. So yeah, it's shutting down. So you can see it very quickly said, oh, that's it, everything's done. And that's it. So that's not really our desire here. We don't want this to be the way our program's running. And actually, we could see there that this warning is even going one step further. I think it's telling us to make sure we're doing all of our hosts in, let's see, give it a second to get there. But it's saying we should make sure that all of the I hosts are in using blocks, and so that they're disposed properly. Again, not normally an issue if you're running a web server because you're not disposing it. And we can actually get around that even by doing something like task.run and just make a task that starts this. And that way it's running a task in the back, and then that whole thing disappears. So this is one way we can do it. And so you can see if we wrap it this way, it will stop entirely because the task context will finish, and that's it. So it never even got far enough. In this case, it didn't get far enough to do it. So we've got something to play with there, and we'll play with that more here in a second because it makes more sense to do this. Right now, we need to figure out the port, because right now we're running on port 5000 and 5001, and again, there could be something else running on port 5000, and then if we can't get it, it'll fail. So what we can actually do is add that down here. So we can come into our create host builder, and we can tell the web builder to use URLs, and this takes in the parameters of the URLs we want to use. In our case, remember, we want to use the loopback. So this server makes us, forces us to do 127.0.0.1. So that's the local host, but sometimes you'll see people just write localhost. I tend to write that as well. But localhost is technically different because it goes through and does a name resolution. So you could point it at the specific IP of the machine or different things like this. And we want to use the loopback interface, which is inaccessible from outside. And so that's a security thing. But you can see here what we're going to do is just tell it to use port 0. So we're not even going to tell it what port we want. We're going to let it pick a port for us. We're actually going to add one more thing here, and that is to say we want to use Kestrel. So we're just letting it know we don't want to be, proxied out to IIS or anything like that. We want to use the internal web server, and in our case for our app, that's perfectly fine because we're not really doing much of anything else with it. So we can see we're going to switch this back to run just so that our program keeps, we can stop it manually and see what's going on. But you can see now if we run, whereas before we had ports 5000 and 5001, now we have a single port which is HTTP and it's running on this pretty random port 52695. And so each time we run, and we may arbitrarily end up with the same port between runs, depending on what's going on in the system, but it's just going to randomly pick a port. There you go, 52699. So it's just picking ports as it needs them and doing whatever it needs. So that part's great, but we do have an issue that we don't know what port that is in our program. And this, unfortunately, is going to be slightly more annoying than it should be because just some ordering of some things got changed here. And so I generally look this up when I need to do it, and I did so earlier just to make sure that I did have everything right. But what we need to do is come into this startup section, and pretty much anywhere in here, we just need to grab a reference to the server addresses. So what we're going to do is go ahead and put in here as some static functions here, or some static variables. And in this case, we don't care about this, and we don't care about that, right? Encapsulate field, we have the field here. So it's just yelling at us because this should be private static. There we go. And then it should yell at us less. And this we need to add the iServer address feature namespace. Perfect. So this we'll just document here to say this is a list of the web server addresses in use. Oops. So we're just going to be able to grab and check on this after. So we need to set it. And so down here, this is a function in app. So we can see we're in our startup and then we're using this configure call. And so what happens is we just want to set this to app, and this is in server features, and we want to get, and I think it's here, iServer address feature. And I think that's all we need. And so what this will do is grab a reference to it. And the problem is that this port 0, that it's using the dynamic port, this still isn't even determined yet here. So we can't just grab the number. So what we need to do is grab access to this addresses list so that after it's all set up and running, after this configure is called, everything else, that it's done, we can come back and figure out what that address is. So we can see if we put a breakpoint here, for instance, right now, we'll get to it. But let's see where it stops. There we go. So we've stopped here, but when we look at the addresses, if we come through into the debugger and look at this app environment, watch, we'll just add addresses. And we can see that right now, it's still telling us that it's 127.0.0.1 at port 0. So it hasn't picked the dynamic port yet. So what we need to do is come back into the program and go ahead and ask for that after we've started everything up. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and say start just to so that we can get some code after that running. And then we'll probably just do this in another function. So we'll do public static, and this will be an asynchronous call. And we need to return a task, and we can go ahead and return the port directly. So from here, what we're going to do is say, first we need some sort of listen port variable. I'm going to start with 0 because we know what we have. And then we're going to have to loop and just kind of wait for the web server to come up. And that's, pretty standard type thing. We're initializing a server here. We need to make sure that we're waiting until it's up to find out what that port is. So in this case, we're going to have to wait. We'll give it a little, wait 100 milliseconds before we check. And we're going to loop over that. And then we need to grab from that address that we set up over here in startup. So remember, we made a static way of accessing this. And so now we just need to use it. So in this case, we know we're only going to have one address ever. So we can just go ahead and grab from startup addresses. And we can just use some link here to say first or default. And we don't have link in our using statements. So let's add that. And if we come back down here, we can say addresses. Oops, we missed. This addresses variable actually has the list called addresses. And that's what we wanted. Perfect. So the first thing to check is if we didn't get one back. So if we did not get an address, so in this case there was something that was not right, we can just wait and ask again shortly. Now what's going to actually show up here is the address in the same format that we asked for it here. So it's going to give us HTTP 127.0.0.1 : but then it'll have a port number. So it'll be 0 like we saw until it's bound, and then it will be an actual port number once one's decided on. So if we count up the characters here, we know that if the address length is less than 18, we don't have a port that we can use. So we can just go ahead and skip that and check again here shortly. Now, excuse me, once we get past that, we can go ahead and try to parse that int. So we can just grab the substring, and we want to start at character 17. So you can see if we count these, we want to start right here where the port number will start. And we can just do it like this. So what this is going to do, if you're not familiar with the try parse function, is it's just going to try and take this string and grab an int out of it. And if it does, it'll return true and put the int here. And if it doesn't, it'll do false instead of throwing an exception. So if we have this, then we can just say return the port. We don't actually need the listen port here. So we could even put a delay here now. And then if we ever get to the end here, we'll just return 0. So if for some reason something happened that broke us out of this, then we'll just say that we failed. So what we can do is things like this. So we could say, for instance, instead of having this be a while, we can say for and just check the number of loops. And we're going to start on loop 0 and say loops is less than, let's give it, so right now we're doing 100 milliseconds, so that's 1/10 of a second. So if we do 10, that would be 1 second. So let's say 10 seconds. So this way, if the server hasn't started in 10 seconds, we can come here and actually, instead of returning 0, we could even throw an exception saying failed to get listen port. So this way we have a little bit more control over what's happening. So this will just loop through and say, hey, If 10 seconds later we don't have anything, then throw an exception. But in the meantime, let's try and grab this port. So we'll add determine the running port of the I like this, listening port of the web server. Perfect. So we need to get this, and in this case, we'll say listen port. Listen port. And we can just say get listen port dot result. So we want to grab the result of that. Now the problem we have is we're back here in this start that we don't have anything to wait. So if we run this, the program will try to exit pretty much immediately. So what we'll just do is add, and normally you want to do this with, since we're using async and using await, we'd normally want to use that as well, just the same thing, the task delay. But I don't really like having main be asynchronous. It works, but for whatever reason, just mentally, I do not like having that. So what we can do instead here is just do system threading thread sleep for a second. And same thing, we're just going to do for int loops equals 0. Loops is less than, we'll say 30 for now. Add another loop. And we'll sleep, so that way we have our program waiting for 30 seconds for us. We probably here want to tell us that we got a port though. So let's add that. Listening on. And then we can add listen port. We should have a number, and we can line that up as well. Perfect. So if we run this, oh, we forgot to remove our breakpoint. And we did. So we can see here, we are listening on port 64941, which we found here. Our program is still running, so that's good. And after 30 seconds, it should stop. So we'll actually make that a little shorter just to make sure that we have this all right. Because here I want to build this, and then why don't we go into source, what is it, bin, debug, netcore app, and then let's run this here to make sure it's exiting where we think it is. So if we run smart local exe from the command line, and this way we can see better, the debugger sometimes stays attached to things when it probably shouldn't and things like that. So we grabbed another random port, and then the application is shutting down. But now here, this is the same problem. We don't have the host being disposed yet. So we definitely want to address that here. But we want to make sure this is running in the background because we want to make sure that when we tell the program to stop, it stops. Oh, it's really not going to stop here. So let me go ahead and kill that quickly. There we go, put this here. And we should have, what did we call this program? Smart local. So we'll go ahead and end it. There we go. So we can see we definitely need to make sure we address running this in a background thread. So again, there's a couple of ways we can do this. One of them is to just do, as we said before, task.run, and then we're going to go ahead and run this guy in the task instead of starting it. So what this will do is make a background task that has the web server running in it. And we're going to even drop this lower. We'll drop it down to 5 seconds so we can just test here. And then we can see here, one or more errors occurred. Reference not set to an object. Okay. So we ran too quickly here. We hadn't gotten this yet. So what we want to do is make sure we start this off with a null explicitly. And then here we can say if startup.addresses is null, just go to the next loop. There we go. So now that that's running, we can see everything started up. We got our ports, and the application shut down. Perfect. Now the problem here was that we said listening on 0. So that's not what we want. Let's check to see why that's happening. If startup addresses is equal to null, and in here, in the startup, we are definitely telling addresses to do this. Private static addresses is null, addresses is here. So let's make sure that we didn't mess up anything when we changed our running order here. So we're definitely setting this to the app server features. Right now addresses is null, and now we have addresses with our port 0 address in it. So that's expected, but we've already exited out. Now why have we already exited out? Let's look here. So get listen port results, maybe we need to add a little bit more here. Let's add 500, and since we're doing that, we can say instead of this, we'll do 20 loops, right? Oops. Hotkeys here. So let's check to see what happens here. No, it's still the same problem. So maybe just for sanity here, let's change this back and do await task.delay, and we'll give it 500 milliseconds just to start. So we'll put it here. There we go. And this is most likely just a synchronization issue, since we're starting these tasks, that guy's getting run first. And there you can see it's even outputting still before this other one is able to put everything up. So again, this isn't a terrible amount of time to be waiting, and we can even bump that up just a little more for safety. We just want to make sure we're doing this in the right order. So we can just do the same thing here if we want to make sure that this task gets put in before the other one. We can go and clean up a little more to put this in another function and give it a delay built into it and things like that. So why don't we actually do that? We'll do public static async, and this is going to return nothing. So we'll say, then it has to return a task, start web server in background. And what we'll actually do is take this line of code and put it here. So we want this to be async, and that's fine. We don't want to do that. We can do, just so that we have the task. Yeah, well, that's the other thing we can do is kill it manually, but we're okay. But then we're going to await task.delay 500. So we'll put our delay in here instead of in here. So that way we're starting the web server, and we're just going to say this is a void because we're not actually returning anything. So start the web server in the background, and wait for it to initialize. So another thing we could do is actually put in a loop here saying to wait until this is done, but we're not going to worry about that. Yeah, I think this is a pretty decent setup for this. So, okay. Oh, actually even better. And that's what we get for live coding. So you can bear with me here while I'm doing this. But I think I see what we did is we just said, if we can successfully parse a port, then return it. But what we really want to do is we want to check here to say, and the port is not 0. There we go. And now we don't have to do any of those extra delays because we have enough built in here. So this way it should come through without any of the extra delays, and we got everything initialized and in the right order. Perfect. That's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So we can make sure, again, just to make sure that we didn't do anything too funny, we'll run it from the command line and make sure that it starts and stops as we expect it to. So it's listening on port 57205, and then it shuts down. So with that, I think that's probably a good place to end this segment. And in the next one, we will go ahead and actually start the smart flow. Well, I guess we have the URLs, so we're going to go ahead and launch those in the web browser and get through those. So again, if this helped, please leave a like, let me know in the comments or on Zulip, and see you in the next video. Thanks.